He would spend the rest of his life paying for one night he couldn't remember choosing. It started as most catastrophes do, with something small and forgettable, a work dinner Yoon Tae-o never wanted to attend, dragged out of his apartment by a coworker who refused to take "I have a headache" for an answer. Haun had linked her arm through his on the subway platform like she was escorting a prisoner to his own execution, chattering about quarterly bonuses and team bonding while Tae-o mentally recited the 7-layer network architecture of the firewall he'd rather be debugging right now. "You work too much," she said, for the third time that evening. "Tonight, you're going to have fun if it kills you." "That's an oddly specific threat," he muttered, but he let her pull him through the door of a club whose name he wouldn't remember by morning, all glass and gold trim, the kind of place built to make ordinary people feel like they didn't belong. The bass hit him first, a physical thing that lived in his chest before it ever reached his ears. Then the smell, perfume and liquor, and underneath it, the unmistakable static charge scent of alphas and omegas circling each other in the dark. Tae-o had spent 5 years on suppressants specifically so he'd never have to stand in a room like this and feel his own body answer to it. He found the bar the way he found the exits in every room he entered, automatically, a survival habit disguised as a bad habit. He ordered a soda water he had no intention of drinking, just so his hands would have something to hold, and used the glass as an excuse not to look at anyone. He looked anyway. He always did. That was how he saw him, not in the middle of the crowd where every alpha in the room seemed to be competing for attention, but at its edge, folded into a private booth like he'd been given the deed to it at birth. Dark suit, no tie, sleeves pushed back over forearms inked in something too intricate to make out from across the room. He wasn't watching the dance floor. He was watching Tae-o. Tae-o looked away first. He always did that too. He didn't look away fast enough. By the time the second song bled into the third, the stranger was no longer in the booth. Tae-o felt him arrive before he saw him. A shift in the air, warm and sharp, like standing too close to a fire he hadn't lit. Sandalwood, and something colder underneath it he couldn't name. "You look like you'd rather be somewhere with better lighting and worse music," the man said. His voice didn't have to be loud to cut through the noise. It simply assumed the noise would get out of its way. "I'd rather be at home," Tae-o said, before he could stop himself. "Alone. Asleep. That's a very specific kind of fun." The stranger's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like the idea of one, held in reserve. "Seo Jun-ho." Tae-o knew the name the way people in his office knew it, in careful half-whispers, the way you'd mention a landlord who might be listening. The Seo Group owned half the skyline south of the river, on paper a construction and logistics conglomerate. Off paper, in the version of the story nobody said out loud in a meeting, it owned considerably more than that. He should have walked away. Every rational, carefully organized part of his mind, the part that color-coded his calendar and triple-checked every line of code before it shipped, told him to set the glass down and disappear into the crowd where men like this couldn't find him twice. "Yoon Tae-o," he said instead. "Tae-o." Jun-ho said it slowly, like he was testing whether it would hold his weight. "You don't belong in a place like this. Neither, I imagine, does whatever conscience you have left." Something flickered across Jun-ho's face. Surprise, maybe, or its more dangerous cousin, interest. He laughed, low and short, like it had escaped before he could decide whether to allow it. "I like you," he said. "That's inconvenient." The music changed before Tae-o could ask what that meant. The frantic overhead beat dissolving into something slower, heavier, a bass line that sat low in the body instead of the ears. The lights dimmed to bruised purple. Every instinct Tae-o had spent years suppressing lifted its head at once. "Dance with me," Jun-ho said. "Not a question. I don't dance. You will tonight." His hand found the small of Tae-o's back before Tae-o had agreed to anything, a pressure both certain and unhurried, guiding him out onto the floor like resistance was simply a step in the choreography Jun-ho had already decided on. They didn't dance so much as stand very close and sway, but the space between them kept closing anyway, inch by inch, until there was no space left to speak of. "You're trembling," Jun-ho murmured, close enough that Tae-o felt the words more than heard them. "It's warm in here." "Is that what this is?" Jun-ho pulled back just enough to look at him, and his eyes, Tae-o registered distantly, were a strange, pale amber, too bright for the dim light, like something lit from behind. "Or is it exactly what you've spent 5 years telling yourself you don't need?" Tae-o had built his whole life on the belief that control was the only thing that had ever kept him safe. Suppressants. Silence. A locked door between himself and the parts of his own biology he refused to negotiate with. And here, under lights he'd have crossed the room to avoid an hour ago, all of it was coming undone with nothing more than a stranger's hand at his back and a stranger's voice in his ear. He knew, with a clarity that frightened him more than the music did, that he was not going to stop this. He didn't remember deciding to close the last of the distance between them. He only remembered that he did, and that somewhere between the dance floor and the black car waiting outside, between one kiss and the next, he stopped being the man who checked every exit in every room. By the time the sun came up, he was in a hotel suite he didn't recognize, in a bed that had gone cold beside him, with a scent still clinging to the sheets that made his chest ache in a way he refused to name. If you made it this far, that means you're enjoying our story a little. Please do us a favor, like and subscribe so you never miss a thing. Also, it would be a pleasure to know where you are watching from. Episode 2, The Quarantine. By the 3rd week, Tae-o's body had started keeping secrets from him. It began small enough to ignore, a suppressant patch that didn't take the way it used to, a wave of nausea he blamed on bad coffee, a heat that came on too fast and too wrong to be the cycle he'd spent years managing like a line item on a calendar. He told himself it was stress. He told himself a lot of things that month. He was still telling himself one of them, standing at his kitchen counter at 11 at night with an untouched cup of tea going cold in his hands, when someone knocked on his apartment door in a way that wasn't really a question. There were 2 of them. Dark suits, no expression to speak of, the kind of men who didn't introduce themselves because they didn't expect to need to twice. Tae-o's first instinct, check the exits, arrived a full second too late to matter. "Mr. Yoon," the taller one said, as if they were colleagues meeting for a scheduled appointment. "Mr. Seo would like a word." "I don't have anything to say to Mr. Seo." That wasn't the question. He didn't remember agreeing to leave his apartment. He remembered the elevator and the car and the quiet, expensive dread of a black SUV gliding through streets he recognized less and less the further they went, until the city thinned into private roads and gated hills, and the car finally stopped in front of a house that looked less like a home and more like a fortress that had learned to wear the shape of one. Jun-ho was waiting in an entrance hall built entirely of glass and pale stone, a room designed to make anyone standing in it feel very small. He looked different than he had in the club, sharper, colder, dressed like a man about to sit across a boardroom table rather than seduce a stranger on a dance floor. The warmth Tae-o remembered from that night was gone, replaced with something guarded and exact. "You," Tae-o said, and all the fear he'd been holding back in the car arrived at once, dressed as fury. "You had me taken from my apartment." "I had you brought here," Jun-ho said, as if the distinction mattered. "There's a difference. Not to the person being dragged out of their own home there isn't." Jun-ho's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He rarely seemed to need to. "You'll stay here. Guest wing, west side. You'll have everything you need. Everything except an explanation. For my life. Or a lock on the inside of my own door, I imagine." "For now," Jun-ho said, "that's correct." He turned and walked away before Tae-o could answer, leaving him standing in a hallway with 2 guards and no version of this that made any sense. That was, Tae-o would learn quickly, exactly how Jun-ho preferred to end conversations, by ending them himself, on his own terms, before anyone else got the chance to. The guest wing was, in its own suffocating way, beautiful. A bed twice the size of his old one. Windows he wasn't permitted to open past a few inches. A door that locked only from the outside, which someone had clearly thought was a courtesy rather than the plain fact of a cage. Tae-o didn't sleep. He sat by the window and watched the guards change shift twice, running through every version of why his mind could produce and discarding each one before it finished forming. Ransom made no sense. He had nothing anyone would pay for. Revenge made no sense. He'd never crossed anyone worth this much effort. That left only the one thing he'd been refusing to think about since the coffee stopped explaining the mornings. He was still awake when the door opened without a knock, well past midnight, and Jun-ho stepped inside carrying a folder like it was something that might bite him. "You should be resting," Jun-ho said. "I should be in my own apartment." "You should be a lot of things you're not." He didn't sit. He stood near the door, at a distance that Tae-o realized, watching him, was deliberate, the posture of a man keeping himself at arm's length from something he didn't trust himself around. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. You kidnapped me. I don't owe you honesty." "No," Jun-ho agreed, quiet in a way that unsettled Tae-o more than his anger would have. "But you might owe it to yourself." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. Something in the careful, clinical way he held the folder, like a diagnosis he hadn't opened yet, told Tae-o exactly which question was coming before Jun-ho asked it. "Have you been feeling sick?" Jun-ho said. "In the mornings. Nausea. Fatigue that doesn't match your schedule." Tae-o's mouth went dry. "How would you know that?" "Because I've been feeling it too." For the first time since the club, something cracked in Jun-ho's composure. Not much, just enough to show the strain underneath it, the sleeplessness he'd clearly been hiding under a very good suit. "And I don't have the luxury of pretending it's stress." The room went very quiet. Outside, wind moved through trees Tae-o couldn't see past the glass, and somewhere down the hall a guard's radio crackled once and went silent again, and none of it mattered half as much as the 4 words Tae-o heard himself say next, though he already suspected he didn't want the answer. "What are you not telling me?" Jun-ho looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Tae-o understood, before a single word was spoken, that whatever came next was going to be the thing that made going home impossible. "Sit down," Jun-ho said. "This is going to take a while to explain, and I'm not sure either of us is going to like it." End of Episode 2. Episode 3, The Fracture. Jun-ho didn't explain that night. He said he would, and then he didn't, and Tae-o spent the next 4 days learning that a man who ran half the city's underworld could still be a coward about exactly one thing. He caught glimpses of it instead, the pieces Jun-ho couldn't quite keep hidden, even behind a house full of staff trained not to notice anything. A tray of food sent back untouched. A meeting cut short, Jun-ho's voice clipped through the wall in a way that had nothing to do with anger. Once, passing the study at an hour he wasn't supposed to be out of the guest wing, Tae-o saw him gripping the edge of his desk with both hands, knuckles white, breathing like a man running from something that had already caught him. Jun-ho straightened the moment he noticed Tae-o in the doorway. "You're supposed to be asleep. You're supposed to be explaining things to me," Tae-o said. "We're both disappointing people tonight." Jun-ho didn't answer. He waved him off with a tired flick of his hand, and Tae-o, furious and unwillingly, unbearably worried, let the door close between them, because he told himself it wasn't his business what was killing the man who'd taken his freedom. He told himself that for 4 days. It lasted until the 5th. He heard it before he understood it, a sound from the study that didn't belong to a man used to controlling every room he entered. Not a shout. Something worse, silence, and then a body hitting the floor. Tae-o didn't remember deciding to run. He remembered the door under his hand, and Jun-ho on the floor beside an overturned chair, pale in a way that had nothing to do with the light, one hand pressed hard against his own abdomen like he could hold something in by force of will alone. "Don't," Jun-ho managed when he saw him. "Don't call anyone. You're on the floor. I'm aware. You need a doctor. I need you to close the door." His voice cracked on the last word, and that, more than anything, was what stopped Tae-o cold, not the collapse, but the fear underneath it, raw and unpracticed, like a man who had never once in his adult life let anyone see him this unguarded. Tae-o closed the door. He didn't know why. He knelt instead, because some instinct older than his anger refused to leave a person shaking on the floor, kidnapper or not, and he found a folder that had spilled out beside the desk. Medical reports, half a dozen of them, dates going back weeks. He didn't mean to read them. He read them anyway, the way you can't help reading a warning sign even when you already know what it says. He understood before Jun-ho said a single word. He understood, and something in his chest went very still, because the numbers on the page weren't the kind that belonged to an alpha. They were the kind that belonged to someone carrying a pregnancy his own body was never built to carry safely, the same impossible thing that had been making Tae-o sick every morning for a month. You too, Tae-o said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jun-ho's silence answered for him. Tae-o got him into the chair, got him water with hands that weren't quite steady, and sat with him while his breathing slowed, the two of them saying nothing for a long time because there wasn't yet a version of the conversation either of them knew how to start. You need to see your doctor, Tae-o said finally. Flat. Clinical. It was the only voice he had left that wasn't shaking. Alistair can't fix this, Jun-ho said, with a faint, humorless smile. He can only document my downfall. You're sick. This isn't normal. Nothing about this is normal. Jun-ho stared past him, out at the dark hedges beyond the window, and when he spoke again his voice had gone low and precise, the voice of a man laying out a problem rather than confessing to one. If my rivals learn what I am right now, they won't wait for an opportunity. They'll make one. If my own people learn it, they won't follow a leader whose... He stopped himself before the word landed. Care looks like weakness in my world. Weakness gets you killed. So I don't have the luxury of care. I have the luxury of control, and lately I don't have much of that either. Tae-o thought of every gossiping half-rumor he'd overheard at the office about the Seo family, the way people lowered their voices even to repeat a name. He'd understood it as a story before. Hearing it now, from the man living inside it, it stopped being a story and became a sentence. One Jun-ho had apparently decided to carry alone until his body made that impossible. So what's the plan? Tae-o asked. Hide in this house until it's out of your hands? I had a plan, Jun-ho admitted. Find you. Keep you here until I worked out how to manage this without anyone learning what you knew. You were the one variable I couldn't account for. You mean you thought you could lock your problem in a spare room? I know how that sounds. I'm not a line of code you can quarantine, Jun-ho. I'm a person. I know that now. The quiet in his voice was more unsettling than any threat he might have made instead. I handled this wrong. Fear is the only tool I've ever had. I didn't know how to reach for anything else. Tae-o looked at him. The king everyone in the city was afraid to say the wrong thing about, folded into a chair, stripped of every advantage he usually carried into a room, and felt the shield of his own anger begin, unwillingly, to lower. He was still a prisoner. That much hadn't changed. But the bars had gone strange and uncertain in a way he didn't yet have a name for. This changes nothing, he said, gathering the folder from the floor and closing it with more care than he meant to show. I still want to go home. I know. Jun-ho's reply was almost gentle. But you understand now why I can't let you. You're the only other person alive who knows what I am. If you walk out that door, you walk out carrying the one thing that could end me. So I'm a prisoner. Permanently. Your secret, locked in a guest room. No. Jun-ho pushed himself to his feet, unsteady but resolute, some of the iron that had built his empire beginning to surface again beneath the exhaustion. Not a prisoner. I'm asking for your help. The words seemed to cost him more than the collapse had. I'm losing control of my body and my organization at the same time, and the only person I can trust right now is you. You have no loyalty to my enemies. And whether you wanted it or not, you have a stake in how this ends. Tae-o's pulse was too loud in his own ears. Helping him was a betrayal of every instinct that had gotten him this far, and yet the alternative he was beginning to understand wasn't freedom. If Jun-ho fell, the person holding his biggest secret wouldn't be left alone to go quietly home. There were no loose ends left for either of them to be. "What do you want from me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Something in Jun-ho's face eased, just slightly, like relief he didn't quite trust himself to feel yet. "For now," he said, "I want you to stay. Not as my prisoner. As my ally." The word hung between them, unfamiliar and dangerous in equal measure. Outside, the first gray edge of morning was starting to bleed into the sky, and Tae-o understood, looking at the folders still in his hands, that the cage he'd woken up in 5 days ago had just changed shape, the bars gone, replaced by something with no visible edges at all, a secret the size of an empire, and no way out that didn't run straight through the man sitting in front of him. Episode 4. The Truce. The house didn't feel less like a cage the next morning. It just felt like a cage with 2 people locked inside it instead of 1. Tae-o told himself that was the only thing that had changed. He repeated it to himself while he sat across from Jun-ho at a breakfast table too large for 2 people, both of them picking at food neither wanted, the silence between them thick with everything they'd said the night before and everything they still hadn't. "You look like you didn't sleep," Jun-ho said eventually, which was rich, coming from a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "I had a lot to think about. Being kidnapped, discovering my kidnapper is somehow in the same impossible situation I am, being asked to help the person responsible for both. Ordinary Tuesday. It's Thursday. That explains why I'm this tired." The corner of Jun-ho's mouth moved, almost a smile, gone before it could commit to being one. It was the first thing that had passed between them all morning that hadn't felt like strategy. They didn't discuss terms so much as arrive at them, piece by piece, the way 2 people navigate a room they can't yet see clearly. Tae-o would keep his laptop, his access restored under careful watch. Jun-ho's organization ran on the kind of digital infrastructure that a security analyst could either protect or dismantle, and it didn't take either of them long to realize which one Tae-o was now positioned to do. In exchange, the locked door became a formality neither of them acknowledged out loud. Tae-o didn't test it. He told himself that was pragmatism, not trust. It was late afternoon, 3 days into the truce, when Jun-ho found him in the study going through the household's network logs, a habit Tae-o had started less because anyone asked and more because it kept his hands from shaking every time his mind drifted back to the folder on the floor of this same room. "You didn't have to do this," Jun-ho said, looking over the screen. "You didn't have to hand me a network with security this embarrassing," Tae-o said. "Someone's been trying to breach your internal servers for 2 weeks. Whoever it is, they're patient. And they're good." Jun-ho's expression shifted, the easy edge from breakfast folding away into something colder. "The Beck family. You know them? I know what they want." He came around the desk, closer than Tae-o expected, close enough that Tae-o had to remind himself, deliberately, that the last time Jun-ho had stood this near him neither of them had been thinking about security logs at all. "They've been circling for months. If they've found a way into my systems, it means they suspect something's wrong. If they confirm it, they move." Tae-o finished it for him, because they'd had this conversation in pieces before, and every version of it ended the same way. "Before you're strong enough to stop them. Before either of us are." Jun-ho said it quietly, and something about the us, unplanned, unguarded, sat between them longer than either seemed willing to acknowledge. Dinner that night was smaller than the last one had been. Fewer staff. Fewer of the careful distances Jun-ho usually kept between himself and anyone in his own house. He poured wine Tae-o didn't touch and didn't seem to expect him to, and for a while they talked about nothing that mattered. Code, of all things, Jun-ho asking questions about Tae-o's work with a genuine curiosity that felt out of place on a man who ran an empire built on fear. "You like it?" Jun-ho said. "The order of it. Everything with a clean answer." "Most days." Tae-o turned his glass slowly, watching the wine catch the light. "It's easier than people. People rarely have a clean answer." "No," Tae-o agreed. "They don't." Jun-ho reached for the folder on the table between them, the next round of financial disclosures Tae-o had asked to see, in the interest of finding whatever the Beck family had already found, and his hand landed, briefly, over to where it rested near the edge of the table. Neither of them moved for a moment longer than the reach required. "You could still hate me," Jun-ho said low, not quite looking at him. "For all of it. The club. This house." "I do," Tae-o said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Some of it. Which part isn't? Tae-o didn't answer that. He didn't trust himself to, not with Jun-ho's hands still resting over his, not with the particular quiet that had settled over the room since the staff had cleared out, not with the memory of a dance floor and a car and a hotel room he'd spent a month trying to file away as a mistake he wouldn't repeat. Jun-ho withdrew his hand first. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. "I have a board meeting in the morning," Jun-ho said instead, standing, the distance between them arriving back where it usually lived. "I'll need the security summary before then." "You'll have it." He watched Jun-ho leave the room the way he'd learned to watch him leave every room, a retreat that was really a kind of self-preservation, a man choosing control over whatever this was becoming before it could choose for him. The breach alert came at 2 a.m. Tae-o was still awake. He usually was, these days, when his laptop lit up with an intrusion attempt more aggressive than anything from the 2 weeks prior, no longer probing quietly at the edges but pushing directly at the financial servers that held every account, every shell company, every thread that connected the Seo Group's public face to what it actually was underneath. He had it isolated within minutes, out of habit more than confidence, and he was still tracing the origin point when Jun-ho appeared in the doorway in a robe rather than a suit, looking more unguarded than Tae-o had seen him since the study floor. "They're in," Jun-ho said. It wasn't a question. They were. "I've cut the access." Tae-o turned the screen toward him. This wasn't a probe. This was someone testing how far they could get before anyone noticed. "Which means, they know I'm compromised." Jun-ho's voice had gone very flat, the particular calm of a man doing the math on how much time he had left. "They're not waiting for confirmation anymore. They're preparing to move." Tae-o looked at him, at the fear underneath the composure, the same fear he'd first glimpsed on the study floor 3 days ago, except now there was something else layered over it, something that hadn't been there before. Not just the fear of a man protecting an empire. The fear of a man who had, somewhere in the last 3 days, started protecting something else as well. "Then we'd better be faster than they are," Tae-o said, and didn't examine too closely why we came out of his mouth as easily as it did. Episode 5. The Storm. The leak wasn't in the servers. Tae-o found that out the hard way, 3 sleepless nights after the breach, staring at logs that made less and less sense the longer he stared at them. "It's not external," he said, when Jun-ho found him still at the desk at dawn, a mug of cold coffee forgotten by his elbow. "Someone let them in. From inside." Jun-ho went very still. "Who?" "I don't know yet. But whoever it is, they have access they shouldn't, a login pattern that doesn't match any external attempt. It's someone who already had a key. They just used it at an hour they thought no one would check." "How long to find out who?" "Give me the day." He gave him, more than the day. It took until nearly midnight, 3 false leads and 1 very careful hour spent inside the household's own security footage, before Tae-o finally isolated the access point down to a single terminal, a single set of credentials, a single name that made something in Jun-ho's face close over like a door slamming shut. "Director O," Jun-ho said, quiet, when Tae-o showed him. "He's been with the family for 11 years. He's been selling you out for at least 2 of them, based on the timestamps." Jun-ho didn't say anything for a long moment. When he did, his voice had none of the coldness Tae-o might have expected from a man discovering a decade of loyalty had been a lie. It just sounded tired. "I trusted him with things I've never told anyone else." "I'm sorry," Tae-o said, and meant it more than he expected to. "Don't be." Jun-ho looked up at him, something unguarded moving behind his eyes. You just did something none of my own people managed in 2 weeks. You found the rot before it killed me. I had a personal stake in not dying alongside you. Is that all it was? Tae-o didn't have an answer ready for that, and the way Jun-ho watched him not have one told him the question hadn't really been about the leak at all. They dealt with Director Oh quietly, the way Tae-o was learning everything in this world got dealt with. No scene, no confrontation Tae-o was permitted to witness, just an absence at dinner the next evening that no one commented on and everyone understood. It should have unsettled him more than it did. He filed that thought away for later, the way he'd been filing away a great many things lately that he wasn't ready to look at directly. What he couldn't file away was the storm outside, an actual one, for once, rain slamming the tall windows of the study hard enough to blur the city lights beyond them into smears of gold and red. Jun-ho stood at the glass with a drink he wasn't really drinking, and Tae-o found himself standing closer than the conversation required, the way he'd been finding himself closer to Jun-ho all week without quite deciding to be. The Baek family will feel this, Jun-ho said. Losing Oh costs them their eyes inside my house. They won't wait much longer to force something before they lose whatever advantage they still have. Then we're out of time to be careful. We were always out of time to be careful. Jun-ho turned from the window, and whatever composure he usually kept armored over himself had thinned to something Tae-o had only seen once before, that first night in a club, before either of them understood what the other one would cost them. I've spent my whole life certain that needing anyone was the fastest way to lose everything. I built this house, this name, everything I have, on that one rule. And now the only person I trust with the thing that could destroy me is a man I took from his own home at gunpoint. A short, humorless breath, almost a laugh. You'd think that would prove the rule. Instead, it's the first time it's ever felt wrong. The rain kept going outside, relentless against the glass, and Tae-o became aware, all at once, of exactly how little space remained between them, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off Jun-ho, close enough to catch the same scent he hadn't let himself think about in a month, sandalwood and something underneath it that still didn't have a name. I should hate you, Tae-o said, and it came out rougher than he meant it to. You said that already. I know. His voice dropped. I'm working on a better answer. Jun-ho's hand found his jaw, careful, giving him every opportunity to step back that Tae-o didn't take. Take your time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Apparently that's the one thing I've gotten right lately. This time, when the last of the distance between them closed, it wasn't a stranger's hand at his back guiding him somewhere he hadn't agreed to go. It was a choice, made slowly, made twice over, first when Tae-o lifted his own hand to close over Jun-ho's, and again when neither of them pulled away. It was nothing like the club. There was no music to blame it on this time, no crowd to disappear into, no version of the morning after where either of them could tell themselves it hadn't meant what it meant. It was quieter than that, and far more dangerous for exactly that reason. Two people who had spent weeks building walls against each other finally choosing, deliberately, to take them down instead. Outside, the storm didn't let up until nearly dawn. Neither did they. Tae-o woke to gray morning light and an arm still around him, and for the first time since he'd been taken from his apartment, he didn't reach for his phone to check the exits. He reached for Jun-ho instead. It didn't last. A phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand shattered the quiet before either of them were ready to let it go, and Jun-ho's face changed the moment he read the screen, the softness of the last few hours folding back into the sharp, guarded calculation Tae-o recognized as the man the rest of the city feared. What is it? Tae-o asked, already sitting up. The Baek family. Jun-ho's jaw tightened. They've called for a meeting. Public. Tomorrow night. They want to discuss a merger. That's not a merger. No. Jun-ho set the phone down, and when he looked at Tae-o again, something in his expression had hardened into resolve. That's an ultimatum. They know something's wrong, and they're done waiting to find out exactly what. Bound in Gold Episode 6, The Reckoning. The meeting was held on neutral ground, which in this world meant a ballroom dressed up to look like peace while every person in it came armed with something. Tae-o wasn't supposed to be there. Jun-ho had said as much twice, in the car, stay at the house, stay behind the security you built, don't give them a second target, and twice Tae-o had ignored him, because he'd spent 5 days finding the rot inside Jun-ho's own organization and he wasn't about to let a room full of strangers decide the ending without him. If this goes wrong, Jun-ho said at the door, low enough that only Tae-o could hear it, you leave. Immediately. No hesitation. You say that like I'll listen. I say it because I need you to, for once. He didn't get an answer before the doors opened and the room swallowed them both. The Baek family had chosen their theater carefully. Chairman Baek sat at the head of a long table with the ease of a man who believed the outcome was already decided, flanked by 2 sons who inherited his coldness more than his patience. Around the room, a dozen faces Tae-o didn't recognize watched the Seo group's heir walk in like they were waiting for him to trip. Jun-ho, Chairman Baek said, warm in the specific way that meant the opposite. You look tired. Business troubles? Nothing I can't manage. That's not what I hear. Baek's gaze slid, deliberate, over to Tae-o. And this is? An advisor, Jun-ho said, before Tae-o could open his mouth. Nothing more. It was, Tae-o understood immediately, the safest possible lie, and also, watching Baek's expression sharpen with interest rather than dismiss it, clearly not one anyone in this room intended to accept. An advisor, Baek repeated, tasting the word like it displeased him. The same advisor your director O mentioned, before he became unavailable to continue our conversations? The room went very quiet. Jun-ho's expression didn't change, but Tae-o, close enough to feel it, felt him go rigid beside him, the particular stillness of a man realizing the ground he was standing on had already shifted before he'd taken a single step onto it. Say what you came to say, Jun-ho said. Baek smiled, and it was not a kind expression. We've had suspicions for months, Jun-ho. Sickness at odd hours. Meetings cancelled. A man who's built his whole reputation on being untouchable, suddenly very touchable indeed. He let that sit, savoring it. My sons believe it's a health matter. Something embarrassing. Something that would make certain allies reconsider whether the Seo name still deserves the deference it's been given. Careful, Jun-ho said. I am being careful. That's why we're proposing a merger instead of simply taking what a weakened house can no longer hold. Baek spread his hands, magnanimous, cruel. Step aside gracefully, Jun-ho. Let us absorb what's left of your territory before someone less patient than me decides to take it by force instead. Consider it a mercy. Tae-o felt something shift in his own chest. Not fear, not exactly, but the sharp, focused anger of watching someone deliberately corner a person he had, somewhere over the last 2 weeks, stopped being able to think of as merely dangerous. He thought of the study floor. The folder of medical reports. The quiet, unguarded fear in Jun-ho's voice the night he'd finally admitted what his own body was doing to him. He thought about staying silent, the way 5 years of suppressance and careful self-erasure had trained him to. He didn't. You're wrong about what's wrong with him, Tae-o said, before he'd fully decided to say anything at all. Every head in the room turned. Jun-ho's hand found his wrist, not quite a warning, not quite fast enough to stop him either. Tae-o. You think he's sick, Tae-o said, to Baek, ignoring the warning entirely. You think it's weakness. It's not. It's exactly the kind of thing your family would need a lot more than a merger proposal to survive learning the truth of, because the truth isn't a liability you can absorb. It's a bond you can't undo. Baek's smile faltered, just slightly, uncertain now in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. Explain yourself. Jun-ho's grip on Tae-o's wrist tightened, and then, to Tae-o's surprise, loosened entirely, releasing not out of hesitation but out of something that looked, for the first time all night, like resolve. He's not my advisor, Jun-ho said into the silence of the room, his voice carrying with the same unhurried certainty Tae-o remembered from a club floor weeks ago. He's my omega. Whatever you think you've uncovered about my condition, you've uncovered it because it involves him too. Which means anything you do to me now, you do to the mother of my children as well, and every ally in this room who still owes the Seo name a debt will remember exactly who forced that choice. The room did not stay quiet after that. Tae-o heard it break open around him, murmurs, a chair scraping back, Baek's own sons exchanging a look that had gone, in the space of a breath, from predatory to uncertain. He understood, distantly, that Jun-ho had just done something that could either save them both or finish what tonight had started, turned a secret that could have destroyed him into a claim no one in this world could safely challenge without consequence, at the cost of every wall he'd spent his life building around exactly this kind of vulnerability. "You're bluffing," Baek said, but the warmth had gone out of his voice. "Ask Director Oh," Jun-ho said. "Oh, that's right. You can't." It wasn't proof. It wasn't even close to proof. But it was enough. Tae-o watched it land, watched the calculation shift behind Baek's eyes from certainty to risk, the particular arithmetic of a man deciding whether the reward of moving tonight was worth the possibility that Jun-ho was telling the truth, and that an entire network of allies might remember, later, exactly who had tried to profit from a claimed mate's condition. "We'll speak again," Baek said finally, rising, the closest thing to a retreat a man like him allowed himself. "When you're feeling recovered." He left with his sons trailing him, and the room slowly emptied around the two of them, and it was only once the doors had closed for the last time that Jun-ho's composure finally cracked, just slightly, the exhaustion of the last month catching up to him all at once. "You shouldn't have spoken," he said quiet. "You shouldn't have said what you said either." Tae's heart was still hammering. "Mother of your children. That's not exactly a secret you can walk back." "No," Jun-ho admitted. "It isn't." Was it true? Or was it strategy? Jun-ho turned to look at him fully then, and whatever answer Tae-o had braced for, it wasn't the one he got, not a politician's careful hedge, but something raw, offered without armor for what might have been the first time since Tae-o had known him. "Both?" Jun-ho said. "I meant it as a weapon tonight because it was the only one I had. But it isn't a lie, Tae-o. It hasn't been a lie since the first night I saw you across that room and couldn't make myself look away." Outside, the city lights blurred gold through the ballroom's tall windows, the same color Tae-o remembered from a club he'd never wanted to walk into 6 weeks ago, the night that had cost him his freedom, and was now, somehow, impossibly, giving him something he hadn't let himself want in years. "This isn't over," Tae-o said. "Baek will come back. Your own people will have questions. And we still have to survive whatever comes after tonight." "I know." Jun-ho reached for his hand, and this time neither of them hesitated over it. "But we survive it together now. Whatever together costs us." Behind them, through the ballroom doors, the city carried on, unaware that the balance of its most dangerous empire had just shifted, unaware that the war for it had only just begun, and that the man standing at its center was no longer standing there alone.